means it when he denies he meddled in the 2016 election. The two leaders meeting on the sidelines of an economic summit in Da Nang, Vietnam, second to last stop on the president's Asia trip. Welcome to a brand new hour inside America's News headquarters on this Veterans Day, and we say thank you to all of those who have served and to your families as well. I'm Arthel Neville.
Hi, Arthel again.
Hey, Eric.
Hello, and a special welcome to the vets who are joining us tonight. Thank you, and thank you for your service. President Trump telling reporters that President Putin was insulted, he says, by the allegations of interference, and he strongly denied them. And the president fears that claims of Russia meddling are getting in the way of working with Putin on pressing global problems like North Korea and Syria. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts tonight, live in Vietnam with more, where it's 6 o'clock in the morning. So, John, there's a lot of attention on the president's conversation with Vladimir Putin, of course.
There is. Good morning to you from Hanoi, Eric. Yeah, the president came back and talked to the White House press pool on Air Force One in between his flight from Da Nang to Hanoi to say that during the APEC conference yesterday, he met with Vladimir Putin, spoke with him 2 or 3 times, and that the president brought up the subject of meddling in the U.S. election, to which he said Vladimir Putin issued a firm denial. When asked if he believes Vladimir Putin, the president told the press pool, he said, in this way, I believe that when he tells me that, he means it, which is not coming right out and saying, I believe him, though some people might say it's a nuance that really isn't particularly significant. But the president did go on to say, and let's put it on the screen, quote, I can't stand there and argue with him. I'd rather have him get out of Syria. I'd rather work with him on Ukraine than standing and arguing about whether or not, because that whole thing was set up by the Democrats. The president did have some other substantive discussions with Vladimir Putin, in particular on Syria. They discussed a way forward, and the two nations put out a statement on the way forward. Now that the ISIS headquarters of Raqqa has fallen, they want to find a way to accelerate the demise of ISIS, increase deconfliction between the United States and Russian forces, which they say helped lead to the fall of Raqqa. And then, of course, they want to pursue a political solution for the long term in Syria, one that is based on the framework of United Nations Security Council resolutions. So that was actually a big point of agreement that the two came to yesterday, even though there was no official, lengthy, formal bilateral meeting. And then we get on to Hanoi here, Eric, where the president's got a busy day.
Meanwhile, we're almost more than halfway through with that trip. So what are the plans for today, especially being in Hanoi, which is rather significant?
Yeah, we've got to board the buses in about 15 minutes' time because there's a press conference this morning at 10 o'clock where the president will likely be asked more about his conversations with Vladimir Putin. But before that, he's going to meet with President Quang. There is going to be an official welcoming ceremony at the palace here. The two of them will have a bilateral meeting. And then we get a chance to talk to the president about what happened during APEC and what happened during his meeting with Quang. Some of the things that they'll be talking about, the president is expecting a new commitment from Quang to put maximum pressure on North Korea to get it to rein in its nuclear program. The president really has been, throughout this entire trip, trying to get together really a band of brothers here in terms of these Asia-Pacific nations to go after North Korea and put the squeeze on them. And then the president will also be talking with President Quang about expanding U.S.-Vietnamese bilateral trade. That is another big point that the president has been pushing, Eric, on this trip. He says the days of these big multilateral trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership are over. What he wants to do is craft very fruitful for both countries bilateral trade agreements. So it would be, things like the U.S. and Vietnam, the U.S. and South Korea, although the president wants to redo that particular trade agreement that's in existence now, and other bilateral trade agreements one-on-one, as opposed to something that the president believes is not in the United States' best interests. Eric?
All right, John, thanks so much. That news conference, as you say, in 4 hours, 10 a.m. is 10 p.m. Eastern time, so we'll be following that up in a few hours. So better get on the bus and not miss that news conference, John. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Will do.
Post established, or published rather, yet another attack on my character and reputation in a desperate attempt to stop my political campaign for the United States Senate.
A defiant Roy Moore today responding to 40-year-old allegations against him of sexual misconduct with minors. The report surfacing this week in the Washington Post. Moore saying it did not happen and that he plans to stay in the upcoming Alabama Senate special election, despite receiving some pressure from within his own party to drop out. Jonathan Seri is live from Gadsden, Alabama. And John, I understand that today Moore made his first public appearance since the allegation surfaced, right?
Yeah, he did indeed, Arthel. He was speaking at a Veterans Day program at a public library just outside of Birmingham. His speech focused mainly on military service and the Constitution, but he also addressed the elephant in the room, those allegations against him, which he flatly denies. Not everyone is convinced, though. Several protesters showed up at the event.
The news report certainly confirmed, it seemed, that it was where the accuser said he was. We need to be worried about children and men, especially in power, that take advantage.
Moore faces Democrat Doug Jones in a December 12 general election. Arthel?
Hey, Jonathan, what will Moore's strategy be going into that race?
Well, it appears the campaign is gearing up to do whatever it can to discredit these allegations of sexual impropriety against Roy Moore that were raised in that recent article by the Washington Post. Speaking on Sean Hannity's radio program, Moore suggested the allegations were the result of Democrats, but not only Democrats, perhaps also establishment Republicans who were trying to undermine his campaign. Former Trump advisor Steve Bannon made similar comments during a speech at the Citadel Military College. Listen.
And I think you're going to find in the mainstream media either tonight or tomorrow, I think there's going to be some pretty interesting stories about how that information got dropped and who paid for it and who weaponized it.
Indeed, Moore faces plenty of opposition within his own party. Today, Republican Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee tweeted, "Look, I'm sorry, but even before these reports surfaced, Roy Moore's nomination was a bridge too far." Remember, this is a tweet coming from a Republican. When you look at Moore's Democratic challenger Doug Jones's Twitter account, he hasn't even addressed these allegations yet. Arthel?
Okay, Jonathan Seri, thank you very much for that report there in Alabama.
Well, there was a somber and deeply meaningful ceremony earlier today when Vice President Mike Pence placed a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns in Arlington National Cemetery. This as the nation commemorates Veterans Day. Parades and ceremonies are held across the country, of course, honoring our military veterans. And Garrett Tenney has more tonight, live from Washington. Good evening, Garrett.
Eric, good evening to you. Today really is all about honoring everyone who has served in our nation's military and fought for our freedoms and our safety. They are roughly 20 million veterans across the country today. And in towns big and small, communities are coming together to recognize their service and sacrifice. In Indianapolis, the city held a service on the steps of the Indiana War Memorial and held a parade featuring more than 80 units marching downtown alongside floats and a group of motorcycles that spelled out Indianapolis. In New York City, home of the nation's largest Veterans Day parade, Governor Andrew Cuomo unveiled new custom license plates for each branch of the military that are available for veterans. And at Arlington National Cemetery, Vice President Mike Pence laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier before addressing a crowd of veterans who served in almost every conflict in the last 80 years. His message to them was, "Thank you, and the American people will always have your back."
The Bible tells us if you owe debts, pay debts. If honor, then honor. If respect, then respect. And the debt our nation owes those who've worn the uniform is a debt we will never be able to fully repay.
The Vice President's challenge for those who haven't served in the military was to find at least one veteran by the end of the day, shake their hand, and thank them for both their sacrifice and that of their family so that we can all live in the land of the free and certainly home of the brave. Eric?
That is great advice. We all should do. And by the way, didn't the Vice President clean the Vietnam Veterans Memorial for like 45 minutes?
Spent about 40 minutes there this morning in below freezing temperatures on his hands and knees, along with about a dozen volunteers cleaning the Vietnam Memorial Wall. And clearly he has his son who is a veteran, as well as his father and his brother. So today was a very moving experience for him there at the Vietnam Memorial Wall. And you can see him there at the end of that.
You got a Vice President in jeans. He's got, boots on. He's got his bomber jacket on, and look what he's doing, cleaning the granite of that wonderful memorial.
No better way to start the day, he
absolutely. Absolutely. We thank him, and we thank all the vets who are watching tonight, of course. Garrett, thank you.
You got it.
Right there.
Thanks, Eric. Well, the fight against ISIS moving to a new level, and Congress wants to step up the pressure with a new military authorization, even as some key members of the Trump administration don't think it's necessary. Indiana Senator Todd Young joins us next to discuss why he feels it is so vital. Plus, disturbing new reports on that deadly ambush in Niger that killed 4 U.S. soldiers. All of this coming up. New information surfacing on the ambush that killed 4 U.S. soldiers in Niger. Reportedly, one of the soldiers may have been captured and executed instead of dying in the initial ambush. According to the Washington Post, 2 villagers found Sergeant LaDavid Johnson with his hands tied, and he had a gaping wound in the back of his head. The deadly attack happened last month outside a remote village. The ambush is believed to have been orchestrated by militants linked to the Islamic State. Sergeant LaDavid Johnson was laid to rest a few weeks ago in Florida.
Well, in the Middle East, meanwhile, the rolling back of ISIS continued. The retaking of Raqqa in Syria means the loss of the last major foothold for the radical Islamic terrorists in that country. Iraqi forces also have fully recaptured Mosul from the terror group. Now, many in Congress say to fully eradicate the Islamic State, the AUMF, the authorization for the use of military force that was first passed in response to the al-Qaeda attacks on 9/11, well, it must be rewritten. Joining us now for more on this is Indiana Republican Senator Todd Young, a member of the Senate Committee of Foreign Relations, and he is in Bloomington, Indiana tonight. He's also a veteran who served in the United States Marine Corps as an intelligence officer. So, Senator, tonight we thank you for your service in the Marines, and thank you as a member of that exclusive club of 100 on Capitol Hill. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you. I want to thank all our veterans and their families for their selfless service and sacrifice today.
That is for sure. Meanwhile, the AUMF, the authorization is in place. Why does it need to be reworked in your view?
Well, we're currently operating under a 2001 authorization for the use of military force. Your viewers will recall that law, which was almost unanimously supported in Congress, was designed to go after those who were responsible for 9/11. We've had over 16 years passed since that time. To the extent a legal argument can be made that that law still applies, that argument becomes increasingly attenuated. So beyond the legalities, I think it's really important that we as an institution, we as the people's branch of government, speak with a unified voice and indicate that we are prepared to reaffirm our support for the men and women who wear the uniform and fight to keep us free and their families.
I mean, the threats, as you know, have gone beyond al-Qaeda. We've got radical Islamic groups. You've got the jihadi philosophy, for example, and in Niger. So tragically, LaDavid Johnson, the sergeant who we just talked about a moment ago, the reports showing that he may have been captured, his arms tied behind his back, and that's an offshoot. He apparently killed, murdered in cold blood, in an operation with 1,000 soldiers in Niger who are fighting the radical philosophy there. He apparently killed by an offshoot of ISIS. Would that be covered under the new AUMF, and should it be written in a broader way to protect us from these terrorist threats?
Well, so that's one of the reasons we need a new AUMF, is so that we ensure that these offshoots or these franchises of whether it's al-Qaeda or ISIS are covered under the new law. And I've worked ever since March, when I first introduced a new AUMF on this very topic, to come up with mechanisms so that we could cover these groups as they evolve, as they come up with different names, as they occupy different geographies and threaten different populations. And I think we're at a spot, having worked with both Republicans and Democrats, where we're very close to coming up with something that can pass out of Congress, and something that will, in fact, cover all these different groups and contingencies, while incentivizing members of Congress to continuously review the war plans of this and future presidents. And along the way, I and others, I think, should be prepared to make principled compromises to make sure that we get this done. There is nothing more important with respect to our constitutional authorities than the importance of declaring war or using military force. And we can't abdicate that responsibility as members of Congress.
And speaking of your constitutional mandates, are you concerned now or in the future that a president could potentially abuse the power of the presidency in terms of launching airstrikes without the congressional authorization?
Well, I'm not concerned as long as we stay vigilant on committees like the Foreign Relations Committee. And we've not only held hearings on this topic of late, but we're prepared to move forward, and I believe to mark up, that is, consider formally in a committee an authorization for the use of military force in coming weeks. So I think we're doing right by the American people, not only by having this conversation, but by acting on it. And it's my hope that in coming weeks we'll have a bill ready that will earn both Republican and Democratic support.
All right. Now, meanwhile, in the coming weeks, you've got that bill. And there's something else coming down the pike in a couple of weeks, as you know, that has to do with taxes. It goes before the Senate Budget Committee next week. They expect to have a vote just after Thanksgiving, we're told. What do you expect? Do you think they'll get this done?
Yeah, I do. I think the president really got us off on the right foot. First of all, he unveiled his tax plan in Indianapolis, which was a nice start. But beyond that, I like the president's framework. The president essentially wants globally competitive rates for our businesses. He wants to ensure that every American has the opportunity to keep more of their hard-earned money, and he wants a simpler code, one where there's less of Washington picking winners and losers, and more freedom for consumers and for investors to figure out what they're going to do with their hard-earned money. If we do that, we'll grow the economy faster. The Senate just released our bill, and I'm still studying it, but I have to say I think it fulfills all the president's requirements, and I believe we're going to get this done hopefully before the end of the year.
Yeah, there's some differences with the House bill. Of course, we go to reconciliation. But meanwhile, I mean, there are estimates that while some middle-class taxpayers can get as much as $1,300 or so back, it may raise the taxes on other middle-class taxpayers. How do you balance that out to make sure the middle class isn't hurt?
Yeah, I think the objective here, our guiding light, should be to make sure that this works for the middle class and for people of modest means who are struggling to take care of their families. Obviously, the economy's changed a lot in the 30-plus years since we last reformed the tax code, and the code has become really complex in the interim. I think if we really focus on the middle class and people of modest means, which I believe we've attempted to do in the Senate bill, then the vast majority of Americans are going to benefit from this. And really the real benefits are going to be realized not in the first couple of years. The real benefits will be longer term, because as businesses find it more advantageous to invest in their own workers and to invest in the capital that makes those workers more productive, they're going to be increasing the value of all of the work that the American rank-and-file worker does, and that leads to increases in wages. And in the end, that's all the American people want. They want a pathway to opportunity for themselves and for their children and grandchildren, good-paying jobs for everyone if they work hard and play by the rules.
Senator Todd Young, we thank you tonight. Thank you for your service, as we said before, and get to work on those taxes and also the AUMF, and we thank you for coming tonight from Indiana.
Thanks so much, Eric.
Well, of course. Have a good night. And speaking of taxes, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Congressman Kevin Brady, well, he'll be talking exclusively, being interviewed by Chris Wallace tomorrow. You can catch that interview on Fox News Sunday, which, of course, is here on the Fox News channel, where you can also check your local listings on the Fox TV stations, but just keep it on the Fox News channel. You can watch it tomorrow in the afternoon, and then later on at 10 o'clock at night. There he is, Kevin Brady, telling us all about taxes, how they're going to save us money, I hope, and help the country, and all that. Arthel.
A Texas town today honoring the victims killed inside a church last Sunday. This as we learn more about the suspect accused of taking their lives, including threatening texts he sent his mother-in-law, who was a member of the church. Casey Stiegel is live from Sutherland Springs, Texas, with more. Casey?
Yeah, Arthel, the cemetery here in Sutherland Springs, a very small community, is ironically just straight up the road and not far past the church, where 26 people were killed at the hands of a gunman last Sunday, and it will be the final resting place for some of those victims. In fact, some of the first victims were buried there today. The family of Richard and Therese Rodriguez, after their funerals, they went up to the cemetery and said their final farewells to two lives cut tragically short. The couple had just retired. They leave behind 17 grandkids, 3 grown children, 11 siblings. But in the midst of such sorrow, this community has also seen extraordinary strength and heroism. Most people know by now Stephen Williford. He is the neighbor who heard the shooting, grabbed his own gun, chased the suspect, and fired shots at him. Earlier today, the family lawyer came to read a lengthy statement, quite powerful words from both father and daughter.
This is Sutherland Springs. We are not victims, we are survivors. We are faithful, we are family. We are more than the media understands, more than the celebrities pushing their selfish agendas will ever fathom. We are strong and we will pull through this. Don't remember us for the killer's evil. Remember us for who we are, the family of Sutherland Springs.
But then look at this. Volunteers from his local plumbers union hard at work today, freshening up his yard and putting in some new landscaping, a simple way to say thank you. Although Mr. Williford does not consider himself a hero by any stretch, they have left their home for the weekend. It was becoming too much with people stopping by to thank them and just the sheer outpouring of support. So the family lawyer says that they had to get away to clear their minds, reset, and then eventually come back. Arthel.
Casey Stiegel, thank you very much. Eric?
Arthel, President Trump talking tough on trade during his trip in Asia. The president promising to put America first when it comes to making those big deals. But some critics say his policy could give China more leverage. Between Beijing and Washington, who will win? And while America salutes its veterans today, Europe honors those heroes of World War I. Coming up, Kitty Logan reports on the emotional Armistice Day ceremonies, ongoing now for 99 years. Celebrating Veterans Day today, and while in Europe they celebrate what's still referred to as Armistice Day, because 99 years ago today, at the 11th minute, on the 11th hour, on November 11th, 1918, soldiers on both sides of World War I laid down their guns and ceased fighting, the war to end all wars, as it was known. In Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron led Armistice Day ceremonies there, laying a wreath at the tomb of an unknown soldier that's right beneath the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Kitty Logan has more now from London.
Hi, Eric. Well, here in the UK, there have been memorial ceremonies across the country for Armistice Day. This marks the 99th anniversary of the end of World War I. At 11 a.m, the bells of Big Ben rang out in London on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. It marks the moment the guns stopped firing in November 1918. 2 minutes of silence followed across the UK. Over 700,000 British servicemen died in World War I. The last of the surviving soldiers from that war has passed away, but veterans of recent wars were amongst those who gathered for a ceremony at this cenotaph monument in London. Britain, alongside the US, has lost, of course, many service members in more recent conflicts such as Afghanistan and Iraq. So this day is very much on people's minds, and there were similar tributes held all over the country. Tomorrow there will be another event at the cenotaph attended by the Queen to mark Remembrance Sunday. There was also a ceremony in France today. The French President Emmanuel Macron laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Paris. Over 1 million French soldiers were killed in battles defending their home soil. And next year, France will host special centenary events marking 100 years since the end of the First World War. Eric?
Hey, Kitty, thanks so much. Arthel?
This day forward, we will compete on a fair and equal basis. We are not going to let the United States be taken advantage of anymore. I am always going to put America first, the same way that I expect all of you in this room to put your countries first.
President Trump pitching his America First policy during his first tour through Asia, saying nations like China are taking advantage of the U.S. through unfair trade deals. This as 11 Pacific Rim nations craft their own trade deal, cutting out the United States entirely. Joining me now is Kyron Skinner, Fox News foreign policy analyst, and she is the Tobey Professor of International Relations at Carnegie Mellon University and research fellow at the Hoover Institute. Kyron, nice to have you.
Thanks, Arthel.
Absolutely. Let's start here. Who is leading the trade game in the region, and who has the better game plan to emerge the victor in that in trade in the region? Is it President Trump or President Xi?
The reason I think President Trump does, Arthel, is due to the fact that on this multi-state, multi-stop tour, the president has outlined for the first time what he means by America First, applying it in an international context, specifically on the issue of trade. If you just listening to the clip that you just played, he said America First means putting America's national interests first, but it also means that other nations must do the same. That's really globalization when you think about it, because globalization doesn't work or doesn't exist even without a rule-based system where everyone accepts sovereignty, the political and territorial integrity of states. He's reaffirming those post-World War II values that over the decades have been eroded by, multilateralism that's inconsistent with a nation-state-based international order.
So, Kyron, if an America First policy prevails, or if a China First policy prevails, what are the upsides and pitfalls surrounding either of those scenarios?
I'm not sure what a China First policy is, because I don't see from the Chinese government side a commitment actually to globalization as just described, even though the rhetoric of globalization has been used. It is China that is violating international law in the South and East China Sea. And in the president's trip to Vietnam in the past 2 days, the Vietnamese talk along with the U.S. about the need and respect for territorial integrity, really in an unveiled way, pointing to the Chinese. It is the United States that is really reordering the international system by getting back to first principles. And that's what I believe the America First policy is actually about. It's not just about the United States.
Yeah, and
it's about reasserting states' commitment to their own interests.
And that's what Vietnamese President Quang was saying, according to John Roberts' report earlier, that the two presidents, Quang and President Trump, they are working on a bilateral U.S.-Vietnamese trade agreement. And as we also reported earlier in the segment, Kyron, that you've got the Pacific Rim nations there. We're reaching a trade deal going forward with TPP. President Trump, as you well know, pulled the U.S. out of the agreement. So in hindsight, though, should President Trump be down with TPP?
No, I think, first of all, to your earlier point about the Vietnamese leader said that the United States and Vietnam have reached a kind of historic moment in relations in which comprehensive bilateral agreements and understandings will take place. I think this is a historic day to just hear that statement. But on to the point about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, of which President Trump pulled the United States out of earlier this year. The 11 countries that remain are even in dispute and negotiations among themselves about what a revived TTP would look like. The Canadians have some reservations. They've also got to think along with the Mexicans about the implications of renegotiating NAFTA. What we're seeing, it's not such a straightforward deal just to sign off on TPP. Nations have a lot to think about.
What's your assessment of the relationship between President Trump and President Xi? I mean, can Mr. Trump trust Mr. Xi, or does it really matter because they need each other? Do they just have to get along?
I think there's a building of trust around mutual interest, and that's actually how trust takes place, begins, and grows among leaders. And the Chinese and the Americans during this visit have reaffirmed their commitment to the UN Security Council resolutions that call for an end to North Korea's ballistic missile and nuclear programs definitively. They've reaffirmed their commitment to a denuclearized Korean peninsula and using dialogue and negotiations to achieve that when necessary. That's a lot of trust right there, the beginning, the building blocks for a stronger bilateral relationship among the world's great powers.
And apparently the President Trump also securing new commitments from Vietnam's leadership to support the maximum pressure campaign to bring North Korea back to the path of denuclearization. So according to your assessment, it appears that President Trump is making some positive headway there in Asia. Kyron Skinner, I enjoyed talking to you, and we'll have you back again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Marthel, as we mark Veterans Day, one organization is helping veterans adjust to a new life at home. Coming up, we'll show you how.
Americans are proud of our veterans, 21 million American of them, but on this day in particular, it's a day to set aside politics and to really express our gratitude and thank our veterans for their sacrifice for what they've done for this country.
Our veterans are a national treasure, and I thank them all for their service, sacrifice, and patriotism. To each of you with me today, you are the heroes who fulfill your duty to our nation, and each of you, under the most difficult conditions, did what you had to do, and you did it well.
As President Trump, of course, sending his message from Vietnam to honor our veterans. Well, here at home, there's an organization called The Mission Continues. It empowers veterans to find purpose through impacting their communities and, in the process, inspiring others to serve. To find more about this and how it can help, the CEO of Mission Continues joins us, Spencer Kempton. He's an Army of Aviation Army. He's a vet. And Jeanette Mack, Assistant Vice President of Corporate Communications for the Navy Federal Credit Union. Spencer, first of all, welcome. Thank you for your service, because you're a West Point grad and you flew Black Hawk helicopters.
That's right, Eric.
Thank you so much. You have transitioned from the military to the private arena. So how can you help, and how does the Mission Continues help other veterans make that transition when you're out in a career in the field, to being behind the desk or to the civilian corporate life?
Yeah, well, one thing that binds all veterans, other than the fact that they wore our country's military uniform, is that they were driven by a sense of service. They're part of an all-volunteer force, and that spirit of service and that desire to serve extends to their time as a civilian. So when they take that uniform off, the best thing that we can do for veterans is to tell them that we still need that service. And small businesses, our communities, our neighborhoods can thrive and flourish by challenging veterans to serve again in a variety of different ways, whether that's mentoring at-risk kids, stepping up as a small business owner, working to eliminate food deserts, to dive into environmental issues. There's so many ways that our communities can thrive by allowing veterans to serve again.
And there also seem to be so many ways that we can help as people, and we've been saying all throughout the last 2 hours. On this day, say thank you for your service, as I said to you. But I want to point out what David Petraeus is writing today in the Wall Street Journal. He says, nothing, however, is more important to veterans who are making the transition from military service to civilian life than a job. Our veterans have given years of their lives to the defense of our country. We honor them by recognizing not just their past service, but their future potential by investing in them and striving to provide not just a job that pays bills, but a fulfilling profession. How can the Mission Continues do that, especially when you hear so many stories of veterans who do have trouble in that transition?
Yeah, I'd take General Petraeus' words one step further and say, not only can we give them a job, but what we can do is give veterans a new mission. And there are countless missions of service that are in our communities every day, and veterans can dive in. Veterans have demonstrated a desire to be civically engaged. They vote more frequently. They work with their neighbor to eliminate problems more frequently. And we can benefit as a country by investing them in making our country stronger one neighborhood at a time.
Well, you would certainly think they've had that military service and they've had that experience that it can only serve them even well and businesses further in that sense. Now, the Navy Credit Union, tell us about that.
Yeah.
Because I always thought that you had to be in the service in order to take advantage of that. Now I found out, gee whiz, I can qualify.
Right, that's true. Navy Federal Credit Union is open to all armed forces. So whether you've been in the Coast Guard or the Marines or veteran, or even if you're in the family of someone who has served, you are eligible to join Navy Federal.
And what do you provide? Because one thing we talk about when you're dealing with mission continuing is helping veterans in small businesses get loans, get credit, and that's just your forte.
Yes, we have small business services at Navy Federal, but what we've also done is taken a look at veterans and done some research. And through that research, we found that veterans are twice as likely to become business owners. And it stands to reason. It's because they are just more financially prepared. As a matter of fact, 78% of them say that they're more financially prepared versus 73% of the general population. So they have the discipline and they have the propensity to become really successful in business.
So if a vet is watching right now and wants to have a business or help their business, what should they do?
Well, you know, if you have an idea for a business, which a lot of people do, and a lot of them actually, when they were in the service, started, you know, maybe it was a hobby or a passion that they had, and they took that passion, that idea, and made it make money for them. So an example is we had a serviceman who was in Naples, Italy, and he fell in love with the way that they made pizza there, and so he learned how to do it, came back home, and when he transitioned out, he opened up a Neapolitan pizzeria, and now he's a successful business owner. So,
do you know where that is?
Actually, no, I don't. But they're all over the country. We have stories like that all over the country.
Well, we'll find out where that pizza is.
Yes, we should.
that special Neapolitan pizza. Spencer, finally, your thoughts on this day? We walked around. We had the parade here in New York City. Guys dressed up in uniforms. There's a new pride. I mean, there really is a new pride and sense of mission, I think, with the vets.
There's a new pride. You know, I was at the parade today. I marched with my 8-year-old son. We had the great fortune to carry the Ground Zero flag for a few blocks. And you know, I think on Veterans Day, I actually think about my son, and I think about a younger generation, those who are looking to the older generation in this country for examples of service and how to live their lives. And I can think of no better example than the men and women who have served us once in uniform and who are now serving us again out of uniform as they dive into community issues and become small business owners and become the strength of this country again from within.
Spencer and Jeanette, thank you. Thank you for what you've done for this country, and the greatest generation continues with our two guests, as you can see. Thank you.
Spencer and Jeanette, thank you both. Well, an early blast of winter hitting the Northeast and Midwest. How long? My mouth is frozen just thinking about it. Midwest, how long will it last? A live report from the Fox Extreme Weather Center. Brr. Chicago getting its first measurable snowfall of the season. The storm making conditions dangerous on Windy City roadways, and it's cold in New York, too. It's hard to believe winter is only officially, 5 weeks away? Temperatures about 20 degrees below normal. Adam Klotz is live in the Fox Extreme Weather Center with the latest on this early blast of winter.
Yeah, Arthur, I don't like it. I don't know about you, but I don't like it. We're looking at cold air really stretching all the way across the northern portions of the country. But really, if you get in the Northeast, these temperatures have plummeted in areas up the upper Great Lakes as well. You're looking at current wind chill temperatures, 27 degrees in Detroit, feels like 30 degrees in Chicago, up and down the East Coast. You're looking at 29 degrees in Richmond, all the way up to 35 degrees currently in New York City. But what you experienced last night, what you're experiencing today, that is cold as it's going to be for a little while anyways, because this is obviously a little early in the season for this. So slowly over the next couple of days, we do warm up. It's not a big warm up, and it does take a little bit, but we do begin to warm up. These are your lows overnight tonight, and if you notice, not a huge difference from what we've already experienced today. So you're looking at temperatures hovering there right in the mid to low 30s, stretching back down maybe in the upper 20s in a couple of locations. But that's the beginning of a trend where we begin to start to see these numbers try to climb up here in the next couple of days. Here's your forecasted highs for your Sunday as temperatures do get a little bit closer to that 50-degree mark, at least back up into the 40s. So add another 5 to 10 degrees for all of these areas experiencing this really cold air. A similar thing happening for us on Monday. But again, as I said, this is just the beginning. You really begin to see these numbers start to climb up on Tuesday and Wednesday. We're going to be back up into the mid-50s in some cases. feeling a little bit more comfortable. Now, for the most part, across the eastern half of the country, we have been completely clear, but the next big system for the West Coast is coming onshore tonight, running you into tomorrow. We've got this big low pressure system dropping heavy rain right along coastal areas from Northern California, stretching you up into portions of Washington, areas where we're going to see 4 to 6 inches of rain. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a little bit of flooding isolated there. Otherwise, it's all about those jackets, those winter coats that we're going to need here the next couple of days, Arthel.
I'm with you. It's too cold too
It's
soon,
too
Adam
soon.
Klotz.
Yeah.
Too cold
Yeah.
too soon. All right. Thank you, Adam. Eric?
Well, you know, we're not going to let Veterans Day end without one of those wonderful stories. How this military dad surprises kids with an unexpected homecoming. You're going to see it when we come back.